Would you say to a business, protect everything?
Always you're looking at what's the company trying to achieve, what's its scale, what are its ambitions, and will IP, formal IP, really help in that process?
How imperative is it that they really sit down and think about their IP?
Often the company doesn't understand what IP they have. The power of that right is very large because actually if it's protected and enforceable and valid, then you're effectively saying, I'm showing you how you're doing it, but you're not allowed to do it because I own it.
What do you think is bullshit in your industry?
There's this conflict of interest in some of these things where the lawyers are not actually aligned with the interests of the clients.
What's the biggest problem facing IP?
Biggest problem facing the IP industry, I think, is
IP or not IP? That is the question. Julius Stobbs, the founder of Stobbs, a specialist trademark and brand attorney who happen to be our neighbors, which basically means a legal firm that looks after all intellectual property, talks us through it. Why even the youngest businesses should be thinking about IP, but should spend the bare minimum on protecting it until they really need to. I guess you might need some professional advice for that. And we talk about AI being the biggest challenge facing IP, trademark, and copyright law right now. And we also touch on why graphic designers and photographers might want to think about getting a different job. Sorry. Julius, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
That's a very no bullshit proclamation. Is that quite at the core of the company?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, when I set it up, I felt like legal services was often, too focused on jargon and overwordy explanations, and we wanted to be able to provide very clear advice in very simple terms. So none of the crap.
Talk to me a little bit about, so if I was to be basic on a company, I'd say, okay, you've got some IP, register your trademark. I mean, you don't have to, but you should. But there's obviously something deeper involved in sort of really looking after and leveraging that IP, is it? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point is always looking to understand the company. Often the company doesn't understand what IP they have. So that might be, as you say, the brand, how you go about protecting that. Is it one trademark? Is it several? Is it only the UK? Is it broader than that? Is it international? What does that mean? So creating a strategy around that, but also helping people identify where there is an intangible asset in their business. Could that be more broadly than that? Could be other rights, copyright, designs, other intangible things, data, helping people with processes around that to make sure that they're capturing it properly within their business, as well as just the sort of traditional IP asset registration and management.
Let's take the software company as an easy example. Do you say to people, people may not be aware, but it's hard to patent software in Europe. It's not impossible, but it's requires some sort of physical aspect of it. You can protect what's called the copyright, literally, of the actual code, isn't it? Would you say to a business, protect everything? Or what would you say? I mean, it depends. But let's just say we've got a software company, that's making money and it's got some valuable-ish software. What would be your general recommendation?
I think always you're looking at what's the company trying to achieve, what's its scale, what are its ambitions, and will IP, formal IP, really help in that process? So it won't automatically be you should register everything that you possibly can. In the context of some, tech side, we mainly don't deal with patent tech side, but we have a collaborating firm that works with us on that side. The point is, in terms of coming up with that holistic strategy for the business, it's like, well, sometimes patenting will be a very important part of what they're doing. Sometimes actually it might be better because part of the patent process is disclosing process during that thing. So actually sometimes taking a confidential information approach, relying on copyright and code, relying in other ways, protecting look and feel, brand, design, copyright might be better. But the point is it will vary from company to company what the right thing to do is, depending on their scale, depending on their aspirations. I had a friend who was a CEO of a telecoms company, was really developing all the time, never patented anything. He was always like, well, actually, we're constantly innovating. By the time someone's copied that last thing, we're always doing the next thing. Now, that, and actually the process takes 2 or 3 years to get a really strong rights.
You tell everyone about it.
You tell everyone about it in doing it. You're kind of helping them.
You probably can't afford to protect it globally.
That won't be the right approach for some companies. For them, it was the right approach. It's going to vary depending on exactly who the company is.
You've said it already several times, and even in the different questions I've asked you. There's a very commercial aspect of how you're approaching this problem, which is very Sorry, lawyers. Unlike the legal profession, who are normally in silos and they're like,
Yeah.
I do X, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when I set up the firm, I wanted to be more commercial, more practical. Most lawyers say that they are commercial and practical. Most lawyers, in my experience, are not. That's a sweeping generalization. There are probably plenty who are, but and the idea of that is not just answering the legal question that's put to you. It's kind of thinking, well, actually, why am I being asked this question? Is it the right question? What is the context of the business that's asking me that? And actually, what are they really getting at? What's the problem that they're trying to solve with this question? And in that way, how does that fit with a commercial aspiration? How important is it? How much can we spend on this issue and be reasonable? You can't just go, well, the gold service on this particular question is the following, without having a real context to it from how important it is to a business, etc. So that's kind of the idea of it being more commercial and more practical.
But a lot of companies, if they're larger, particularly in America, they like this model. They'll have once you get big enough, hire your own lawyer who then cuts your costs because they can answer half of it.
Yeah, I mean, at its extreme, Apple have 1,000 lawyers at least. Yeah,
Blimey.
they have a very large law firm. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's all different varieties of that, but actually it's a slightly different role in-house, much closer to a business. You're having to provide a specific answer to a particular question rather than just a set of options.
And it's not racking about time, is it?
No,
you
correct.
You become a sort of, you got to be commercial.
Correct.
X part of the business is saying, give me an answer. I need it today. Don't cut the crap.
Exactly. And I think that helps, so that blend is helpful for us. But ultimately it's about wanting to explore those issues, wanting to be more commercial and practical, and then training people to really understand what that really means.
I mean, you're we've only been getting to know each other a little bit, but you seem, a very positive person by nature. But are there things you worry about? Are there things that keep Julius up at night?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm like to be reasonably risk tolerant. I mean, I think which is a slightly different point, as in, I'm not put off doing things because there might be some worry or some risk over it, which I think seems to be slightly unusual in a legal world as well. Meaning, I'm very happy to look at a thing and say, well, I'll be moving in this direction, and think, well, there is some risk in that, but can I assess that risk, and can I mitigate it and move forward? So I like to think, worry doesn't sort of hold me back in that respect.
And you're talking about your own business commercial ambitions.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, of course, when we're advising clients, we're always looking at risk for them and being able to advise on it in a practical way. But for our own business moving forward, worries, the world is moving very fast. So, staying up with and ahead of our industry is always something that I'm thinking about. As you run your own business, you can't really stand still in these things. You've kind of got to be thinking, what's the next thing? What's the next thing in order to stay relevant? What does the firm
look like in 5 years?
Correct. And, so that's definitely something that always is in my head, and thinking about, how do we move forward?
It's a fascinating question though, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't come across arrogant, but I find it's almost like, there isn't much innovation in these industries, is there? I don't know how much people really are asking the question of what it should be looking like in the future.
No, I think that's right. I think it's important to do so, though, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I learned the other day that the largest law firm in the world has one associate to one lawyer. So that's like, in normal language, one trainee to one lawyer practicing. Yeah. And that's the ratio, which I found like, wow, that really tells you a lot about law. It's the apprentice and the boss.
Yeah. That's the traditional model, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, an accounting firm, you've got 50 to the person, the top person. I don't know. I'm exaggerating, but it's a lot.
We're in between, right? We're a bit more of a pyramid rather than a tower.
What do you feel about protection of IP? I was just having a hilarious conversation with a good client that will remain nameless, but we were talking about protection of IP, and we were talking about, if you're Gucci, and, there's a lot of people out there with unlicensed version of your products, and how do you police it? I mean, how do you even know? They were saying they were talking about someone they know, and they were saying, well, they literally have a bloke, called, well, he's not called Boris, but he's called Boris. He's 7 foot tall, and he just goes around bopping people on their head, taking their stuff. So you just go down Borough Market and just go, right, I'll have that. It's not unlicensed gear, and you have a right of almost confiscation and stuff. But I find the protection of intellectual property, I mean, if we just take, someone who's got a valuable brand like that, I mean, I find that fascinating. Like, you're Gucci. How much of the stuff in the world are you protecting? And then how much money should you be getting for that brand? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I think mostly those large brands, particularly in the fashion space, their biggest issue is dealing with this proliferation. I mean, back in the day, it was the guy down the market.
Yeah.
But now it's so easy to infringe online that actually that becomes the bigger thing. That doesn't mean
even
that,
for something like Gucci, which is physical goods. Really?
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because the platforms, there are at least 1,000 online marketplaces around the world, like Amazon, but Amazon's one. There are at least 1,000 of those around the world. And the ability to actually make a product is so easy now. You then got those platforms fulfilling those orders.
So the real problem isn't isn't Del Boy with a suitcase full of dodgy Gucci.
No,
it's the fact you can go online and order 100 dodgy Guccis.
I know. Well, that, and you can sell them and fulfill the order. Whereas back in the day, you're like, well, I need to have a market stall. I need to be able to physically get that. I need to have a customer passing by. Now I can promote it on social media. I can produce it in China or Bangladesh. I can do that very cheaply. I can actually commission that. I don't really need to have much knowledge about the actual industry to be able to commission something like that. I can slap a brand on it and sell it. And by the time anyone's really seen it, I've already started to make money in it. I know we have a fashion brand client who does somewhere between 2 and 3 million online takedowns a year.
Wow.
Individual separate things. So the volume is absolutely enormous. The challenge is getting to the bottom of what the really serious issues are and what they're not when you've got so much noise. Most of them, the value of those brands is so high, they have to do those things because gradually more and more dilution impacts on the value of that asset.
You've almost got to be seen to be doing things, don't you?
You have to do something. It's then what's the right spend, bearing in mind, a turnover of X billion versus 500 million versus 100 million versus how big is the issue. Understanding that issue and understanding what the really critical things are is the key thing. It may not be Del Boy down the market. It may be a group of manufacturers who are selling through 100 different online profiles. Finding that and shutting it down is the tricky thing. Finding a lot of stuff is not hard.
Yeah.
So doing monitoring and finding stuff, you can find a lot. But what you do with it is not entirely straightforward.
Well, especially with great respect to China, but China doesn't have an entirely, heavy approach to. Well, they do and they don't. Having had my trademark stolen in China and my it caused me all sorts of problem there. But is it fair to say that some country, because could a manufacturer? Let me ask the question that way around. Could a manufacturer in the UK pump out dodgy Gucci products, and does that go on? Or
they could. They would likely get found, caught and shut down. They would likely, in the UK, depending on how aggressive Gucci were with it, they'd likely end up spending more money than they've achieved in doing it. But it does happen. I mean, it's not like the UK is free of that kind of flagrant infringement.
Boys.
Exactly. It does happen. And of course, sometimes commercially, the stuff that's closer to your own channels of trade, so maybe the odd listing on Pinterest or Alibaba or something like that is less commercially important, depending on the business, than something who's selling close to one of your stores or, through Walmart or through Amazon, where you are also selling. That can be more commercially egregious, more important to deal with it.
Yeah. You've got to pick your battles effectively.
Correct.
What do you think about the protection of trademarks and the protection more of intellectual property? I mean, globally, the rules vary a bit. I mean, I forget what they are off the top of my head for the UK and Europe, isn't it? Drug patents last 15 years or something. I forget.
Yeah, so patents are limited in their duration. So normally 20 years. Copyright is limited in duration, but for a longer period.
So often the lifetime of a human,
plus a period, plus 70 years. I mean, they can be quite long periods for copyright, but it depends on the type of copyright. Trademarks, so around brands, can be protected indefinitely. So, if you're Nike, you can own Nike and keep owning it forever. The rights last 10 years usually in most jurisdictions, but you can renew them indefinitely. Whereas a lot of the other rights, design right, which is around the look and feel of a product, copyright, which is usually artistic or literary work, patent, which is around technical innovation, they all have limited durations. And the idea of that is encouraging competition.
Do you think they're about the right levels? I mean,
I mean, from a trademark point of view, I don't see a logic for not continuing to own your own brand.
No, that makes sense. Otherwise, what's the point of running a business?
Correct. I think you could argue there's quite a lot of argument around whether some copyright durations are too long. Feels like, I mean, if you're a patent owner, you would say patent duration shouldn't be lower than that. I mean, some people say, oh, actually, you know, certain areas should be freed up. But of course, you know, drug patents and all these kind of things, there's a huge amount of investment goes on to actually create the new innovation. So it's partly effectively allowing those companies to make some money on the back of it to support that. I think they're about right, honestly.
Okay,
that's but you could argue about it. But
I mean, there must have been a period in time, I'm sure if you studied the history of it, that people had to fight really hard to get the protection for these rights. You 100%. Know, someone had invented, I mean, I happen to know the grandson of the guy who invented some part of the fridge, and, you know, their family, they lived off this, you know, that's where the money comes from. But yeah, you know, obviously it runs out. In that instance, it must have run a while. But yeah, you know, you can say the same in the music industry. People can get quite passionate and upset from the industry if you don't know what you're talking about, and you be a bit flippant because you're like, you know, people had to fight very hard to get these rights to stop being ripped off.
Yeah, and in the music industry, there's there's a range of different issues going on. There's the whole, you know, 10 or 20 years ago, life changing and everything being streamed. And that was a huge issue from a copyright point of view. No longer am I controlling absolutely my own material. It's now being streamed and easier to access. That was dealt with by a different commercial model. So ripping off you know, an artist's track and playing it and not paying for it is one of the things that they're dealing with in this. But there's quite an advanced model around that now. Whereas what we've seen a lot in the news is people like Ed Sheeran being sued for copying, you know, someone else's work.
Is he being sued at the moment?
He actually just finished. I mean, and proven to not be copying. And his whole thing was, well, of course, when you're that successful, people are going, wow, there's some similarity between that song and the song that I wrote.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone's like, well, okay, this was copied. And, you know, he spends X years in court proving that, you know, yes, of course, there's a difference between having some inspiration and you know, directly copying a track and going, well, what's the creative process to create a new song? And actually, he quite famously has said, well, there's only a limited number of chords, right?
Well, it's what I always found interesting as a hip hop fan is hip hop always got really punished hard for this because it was easier to prove that you'd nick that because we sample it. Whereas I can go to a gig and come back and play a jazz version and it's okay, you know. And I mean, I struggled with that because it's had quite a big impact on hip hop. I always remember there's a very funny interview with Damon Albarn. He did a Desert Island Discs, I think it was, or he was on a Radio 4 interview anyway, and then they said they played him a Kinks song, and they said, "Oh, do you know this Kinks song? And oh, do you like the Kinks?" And he said, "Oh, I love the Kinks, huge Kinks fan." And they said they play this song, and then they go, "Sounds a lot like," and then they play one of the Gorillaz songs, and it's so fucking similar. And he's like, cuts back to him, and he's like, "You've just cost me about 20 million quid, you have." And then they do it with another song, and he's just like, "Oh, bloody hell!" But that almost is the point, isn't it? You know, he's not making a conscious decision.
Correct.
You know,
and you see, that's an argument really around what the scope of the rights are, rather than what the duration is. So, what does it mean to own the copyright in that? You know, when is it an infringement and when is it not? That, of course, is why a lot of us have jobs in this space, because it isn't straightforward to go, well, actually, is that an infringement or not? Where was there direct copying? In Ed Sheeran's case, because he's getting pursued because he's been so successful, and there's always some similarity between a song and another song, he's taken to recording all of his studio sessions. So he records all of his process around creating a new track.
You can show how you come up with it.
Here's my process. Right? That when someone comes forward and accuses them of something, well, here's which session was that?
It's not the same, but it's like they always used to post yourself the cassette
in order to prove when
that
you
I came up with it first, sort of thing. Yeah. And there's those sort of, I mean, in Britain, I actually quite like our approach to stuff generally. You know, you have an intrinsic right, so that, you know, if you come up with something, well, that's yours. You don't need to register it. You know, as in America, you kind of got to register it, or it's not yours.
Well, in order to get the full access to the remedies, you need to register in the US, whereas here you don't.
And there's that cock up in America that there's that whole period where all this stuff is out of copyright. I forget now, but there's all these films from this period where they changed the law and then all this stuff fell out of copyright and there's all this stuff you can rip off. Not just because it's old, something happened anyway. Okay, so we're sitting in front of like SME type businesses. Let's say we're about to, you know, we're thinking about selling our business or getting ready to raise money for our business. What, you know, other than obviously come and chat to you, how imperative is it that they really sit down and think about their IP?
Well, I think I am going to say that they should be thinking about it from the very beginning. but that doesn't mean they should be spending lots of money on it. I think that's the important distinction.
Maybe that's the question, isn't it?
Correct. I think, at the point where you're conceiving of a business, it should be something that you think about, if only to do a couple of things. If only to speak to someone about, well, in the context of this business, if it goes in the right direction, where am I creating IP? Everyone, if you read The Economist, any kind of business publication, everyone is saying IP is likely the most valuable asset that a business is going to have. So understanding what that IP will be in a business is important. I think the other benefit that can have is, without spending any money, you can create process. And I don't mean suddenly you have a team of thousands who have to do the thing, but in any size of business, a process to make sure that you're capturing stuff. So even if it's confidential information, how are we treating that information internally? But you don't have to spend any money on making sure that you're treating some things in a certain way, or you're asking questions in the right way.
A process of how you think about it, or process for capturing it?
Could be both. It could be, or how you think about it. I mean, that's really the core of your business, in terms of what you're developing and new ideas. But actually, what is and isn't important information in your business? How are you then storing that information? How are you treating it differently? At what point should you be asking a question about whether we should be registering something or not? And of course, there are some bits of IP that you lose the ability to protect if you don't deal with them straight away. So tech and innovation, that's the case. So at least asking the question early on. You see a lot of small businesses falling into that problem.
Well, if you don't protect them, you lose the
because
right.
You've disclosed. If you disclose on that tech side, on the patent and innovation side, if you just march forward with the business and you disclose what you're doing, which often will be the case, you lose the ability potentially to protect it, because it's when you go to file it, it's no longer novel or inventive because
you've shared it.
Correct.
So this is the core of patenting. The first thing you need to do is you need to show that this is a novel idea globally.
So there are some things that you can do early on in a business that can really shoot yourself in the foot. So actually thinking about it and asking the questions without necessarily spending any money, but just knowing what the right stages are to do certain things and what processes you can put in place within a business to make sure you're not losing out, I think is really important. Then, of course, when it comes to a stage where you're getting investment or the business is moving forward, thinking about, well, actually, what would be a reasonable spend in the context of IP, how important IP is to the business. If you're an investor, when you're looking in, actually, what do I want to see in this business? And that's definitely something.
Nice and tidy IP.
Correct. A really nice, solid portfolio. Your business is in UK and Europe, but if I'm investing in it, I really want to be able to expand it out into, like what you guys do, expand that out into other bits of the world. Do I have the brand protected? Do I have those sorts of things protected in a way in which that investor might want to see it? And usually the spend on that is going to be minuscule compared to the sort of return that you get out of the value in the business or the investment.
I mean, an interesting example, I always think like patents are so often, if you're patenting exactly how you do something, then that's kind of telling everyone how to make something, and people can sort of reverse engineer it and then alter it slightly, or if you haven't protected in a country. But I remember years ago, a company my brother was involved in had a lovely patent, which was the right to use voltage as a way to measure SNP DNA, which probably sounds like nonsense to people, but basically, if SNPs are like an extract of DNA, say, and if you put two together that were the same, you get this tiny voltage charge. Some university student worked this out. So the first thing you sit down and say, it's like taking a really known technology and applying it to another known thing. That can be a really powerful patent. You go and get this right to say, I'm the only person who can use electricity to look at DNA. And sometimes I guess that's your thing. You could go around be telling people, oh, I've bumped into this thing. But actually to me, that was always an example of painting that. Like sometimes you'll sit in front of someone and they're saying something, you're like, check what anyone's actually
if you
thought
can,
about.
If you can, the power of that right is very large, because actually if it's protected and enforceable and valid, then you're effectively saying, yeah, sure, you can, I'm showing you how you're doing it, but you're not allowed to do it.
No.
Because I own it.
I own the whole space.
Correct.
I could come up with, and then you're in one of those positions, you can just set, because sometimes you meet people and they go, I'm going to license this to people, I protect, and I'm like, well, good luck with that. But actually, if you own something like that, you could go down to Glaxo and say, by the way, I've got this. If you want to do it.
And it's a totally different, if you don't protect
I'm going to sit at home, have a cup of tea.
Quite right.
I learned some very
passive income.
Yeah. I learned some very boring stuff for tax people out there about a clever inventor I met who'd made various inventions and then was leaving the country. And I thought, oh, well, that's good, because he was going to someone without much tax. And he said, yeah, when I leave, they're my inventions. They go with me, yeah? No, it turns out they're bloody connected to the country, the place where he invented them, which is a very interesting. So he has to pay income tax, UK income tax, even though he lives elsewhere. So actually, it was really curious. He must have registered them, I think. I think it's where you register them or something. But yeah, I was very disappointed when I worked that out, because I was like, this is a doddle. You know, you've come up with these inventions, bugger off. This is fantastic, because the checks had started turning up. A couple $100,000 a year had started turning up for this thing he'd come up with. And you do meet these innovative people. When I was like young, I wanted to be an inventor, and I used to watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I wanted to be anyway. It's going off piece here. So,
I mean, on that's of course one of the things that larger corporates do, is the structuring of their IP is exactly for that reason. Of course, the difficulty is moving it around when it's already valuable.
Yes.
So moving it around when it's already valuable creates normally significant transfer pricing and capital gains issues.
Happens all the time.
But what they're usually trying to do is create the existence of IP in relatively low tax jurisdictions and then charge for it around their group, to push income from high tax jurisdictions into low tax ones. And actually IP is used for that quite a bit.
What do you think about the UK as a place to hold IP? I thought it used to be tremendous, particularly when you used to be able to do R&D claims and claim any activity internationally and put it all in the UK. Is it still seen as a great home of IP, or not so much?
I think probably not so much. In terms of those financial structures, I mean, I think it's a very strong and robust IP system. It's a very good court system in relation to IP.
Unbribable judges, I'm always told.
Correct. And I think, you're going to get, strong results in that respect. But in terms of ownership, it's not the worst place, but there are places which are much more advantageous.
What out of interest, off the top of your head, what countries are sort of like, do you think are really strong on holding?
Usually offshore. So I mean, or
the Singapores,
or Switzerland, or I mean, it's interesting. You need to choose tax jurisdictions, that work from this point of view. So low corporate commercial tax, but they also need to be jurisdictions that are signed up to all of the relevant IP treaties. So that kind of slightly limits. But there are a good half dozen.
Marshall Islands, no.
Yes, exactly. So some of the traditional offshore havens don't work for IP, because actually if you have a corporate entity in the Caymans or whatever, then actually it can't own certain aspects of IP because it's not signed up to the relevant treaties.
Oh, there's loads of global treaties like WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, to say that we'll all respect this law.
But also actually to have access to the systems that you're protecting the IP through, you need to be a relevant jurisdiction for that. So actually owning it in another can cause issues. So that's one of the things to look out for.
Is China signed up to all these treaties?
It usually is, yeah.
Oh, hilarious.
Yeah, so China works.
Okay, that's interesting. And actually that's interesting in what you're saying, because I think that's right. I think so often people build up value in a company, and then companies are so global these days, and then you get into this sort of moving IP around, which is painful, I would say. I mean, you can always license it and stuff, but if you're sitting in the UK and you've developed something, you can't just stick it offshore. I mean, you can sell it at an early stage.
Correct. I mean, it's more about it comes back to thinking about the planning of it. I mean, you don't want to spend a fortune on a structure if you're currently turning over 50 quid. But thinking about it at a reasonably early stage, so you're not doing it at a point where it's basically precluded because of the value, is definitely something to be thinking about. Thinking about in small businesses. I'm an individual, I'm trading, actually should I be owning IP as an individual or in a company? Where should that company be? Should there be a licensing structure between them? I've had a couple of businesses that were relatively small where they've kind of saved themselves by keeping the IP in the individual, and licensing it into the trading entity, for example. That can protect the IP a little bit from financial issues.
That's a very, I mean, if you don't know it and you're listening, keeping your IP separate from your trading, which means keeping your operations separate from your IP, is fundamental.
Yeah, that could be two companies.
It could be two companies, but it could be an individual. Correct. Who holds it outside of the company. Correct. Yeah, that's such a good point. I find it so interesting these days. The sort of the global aspects of this can make it so complicated at times. For your business, have you got a long-term goal?
Yeah, I mean, vision-wise,
what's the vision, Julius?
I want to be the best international brands advisory firm. That's where we want to be. I mean, it's still relatively limited. It's still quite niche.
It's not tiny though.
It's not tiny, no. I mean, I think we've done a nice job in the UK. We're gradually expanding in the EU, but really we want to be the go-to. If any large brand owner is thinking about, how they're dealing with and managing their brand rights, I want to be, on that list to be dealing with that. That probably means, we need to be in a few more places in-house, so US is a huge jurisdiction for brand owners. We don't need to be everywhere, but
you've got to get to the US.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. So definitely, I have an aspiration in that respect. I mean, we're not. The aspiration is to do exactly that, to be the best in this internationally.
I half asked you this before, but I realised I haven't got it clear in my head. As a software company, as it's difficult to register and protect software in Europe, because Europe doesn't allow you to patent a software unless it does something physical. The example I'm always given is a software that adjusted your printer or something. And then people go to America and protect it? Is that the standard practice? What would you say?
It can be. I mean, in that sense, definitely not giving up because it is difficult in the UK, because, the whole point about IP protection or that kind of protection is to make it more difficult for your competitors to do what you're doing. So thinking about where the product and where your business is likely to develop and working out whether it's potentially protectable in those jurisdictions makes total sense. The US is the obvious one because it's such a huge market. In that particular context, software, there are more liberal rules around patenting software there. So if you've got a potential software product that you're based in the UK, but there's likely a significant market in the US, it will be a significant barrier to entry for someone else if you own a patent there. So it makes sense to be thinking about it. And that's often the case strategically. We see a lot of people, I mean, again, on the patent side, or indeed any IP right, you can spend a fortune protecting things everywhere. Whereas actually sometimes thinking about what are the key strategic places that it would make it very difficult for a competitor to do anything if they are precluded from these markets. You don't need everything to make that very worthwhile. Again, depends on your objective.
You don't need the world because you've got to commercially exploit it. You've only got a window of time to do it in,
On the patent side, yes.
On the patent side. And I appreciate you don't necessarily get deep into the patent. But I mean, for people's sense, if you wanted to patent something, you easily spend 20 grand looking into whether it's novel and getting an initial sort of opinion, because someone has to basically research globally everything and say, is this novel? And then I can't even remember what, but get your checkbook out for 100 grand if you want to protect it globally and, in 10, 20 countries, I would have thought, I'm guessing.
Not an unreasonable order of magnitude.
Well, that's nice. What's the biggest problem facing IP?
Biggest problem facing IP, biggest problem facing the IP industry, I think is the industry as in the legal professions. I think is what's happening with AI. I mean, I think that.
Oh God!
I think that, but in the sense that because everyone's worried about that taking everyone's job, so that definitely is the big issue at the moment. And I can't think that there's any other way than to make sure that we're across developments in technology and utilising and harnessing them as best as possible to deliver solutions as well as we can for our clients. I think that has to be the case, but that probably is the thing that is vexing people most at the moment in the industry.
I do feel, I have good friends who are graphic designers. We just had a meeting and I was like, where'd you get that logo from? What's that platform called, D? Midjourney.
Oh yeah, Midjourney's amazing.
They knocked it out on me. I was like, every time I see stuff from that thing, I'm like, that's better than what my graphic designer would have come up with anyway. In fact, it's exactly what I wanted because I told Midjourney what I wanted. Whereas my graphic designer listens to me and then goes, no, big up Adam Biddle. He's a fantastic graphic designer. And I know a few other beside, but they're artists. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So you put them into the machine, but they're not machine. And they go, well, I think it should look like this. And you're like, oh, well, I sort of had a different picture in my head. That Midjourney's mental. You do wonder. And then who owns the IP of Midjourney?
Well, when we're advising artists who come along and say, well, what do I do if a client comes and says, well, I've just created this on a Gen AI platform? I always say the right thing to ask them if they're a corporate who've done that is, do you not care about owning it?
Because do you not own it?
Well, there's a lot of questions over how you would go about owning that. You could go and trademark it, but if you're talking about, let's say you're creating imagery for a new computer game, you do it on Midjourney. There is a real question as to whether there's any copyright in that.
Because I would have accepted terms and conditions. What do they say?
But it's not really about the terms and conditions. The terms and conditions won't say that Midjourney own it. It's just because it's been created by a system. A lot of IP systems would not accept that that's something that is protectable. And so in essence, if you're an artist,
it's not created by a human.
Correct. Now, of course, I mean that's a very nuanced question.
I gave it the prompt though.
And of course, that's where all the arguments are.
Right.
But it's not straightforward, right? It's not straightforward as to what. So I'm always saying to artists, just say that. Just say that. It's like, well, I mean, if you don't want to own it, I mean, fair enough.
Great answer.
Knock yourself out. But if you want something that actually is going to be part of your business moving forward and you want to prevent other people from doing it, you might want to use me.
Because legally, the system currently only understands human creation. Effectively, the legal
mostly. I mean, that's a oversimplification, but for the purposes of this, yeah. I mean,
within that world
issue.
of art, the language is all like the creative arts of a human or whatever, isn't it? We just had no idea the robots would be knocking it out so well.
Absolutely, they're really good at it too. I mean, there is
speed too.
There is a point that at the moment those systems are not about that real sea shift of creativity. They're about taking what's already there and doing an incredible job of assimilating it from questions. So the real change, I mean, in art, the real change is
the same thing we do, though, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, true creativity comes along occasionally, maybe.
And I think that's right. That's only the exceptions. You know, Picasso is doing something very different than people previously, or the greatest fashion
designers.
designer.
When you study that, there were probably a couple of people around him doing that kind of stuff. There's usually, a few people who influenced him. It's like that's what happens in music. There's a band that's known for creating that genre, and then you're like, oh, well, actually, there were 5 groups before him that no one heard of that they used to play in the pub and whatever.
This is the guy who got really successful or famous on it. So I think that's the big issue for the industry. I mean, exactly where it goes, we don't know at the moment. So,
wow, AI is a huge topic for you.
Enormous one, yeah. I would say, and again, we were talking about law firms before. I mean, the legal industry tends to be pretty conservative, so actually, this is definitely a challenge for people. Whereas there's a huge variety in terms of how people are looking at this from an industry point of view. So there are big law firms really heavily investing in AI platforms and all of these kind of things and looking at it, which I mean has to be the right thing. It's not going away. So embracing how you can use this from a process point of view, how you can harness it, to the best effect for your clients, how transparent you need to be about that. All of that kind of thing is very important. But I think there are a lot of people who are like, well, this is not right.
How do people know whether it's created by AI anyway? Is AI going to keep a record of it?
Well, I mean, it would.
I could just be the graphic designer and I send it in. I mean, how are you going to know?
I think technically, I'm sure technically there's a way, but I mean, it would be very hard in the engagement to know.
They'd have to know where you made it.
And that's, of course, why. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around regulation on that. So disclosing that. So we're getting asked that by clients. Well, if I let my marketing team use an AI system, what do I need to do? And of course, there's increasing regulation, the EU AI Act and all of these kind of things, which are saying, well, if you're using AI, you need to disclose that you're using AI. So I think that's how it will happen, that there will be regulation around it. But of course, that we're in the very early stages of all of that.
That hasn't come out yet.
The EU AI Act has.
Oh, has it?
But,
well done, EU.
Only fairly recently. And, there's a lot of discussion around that, whether it's the right, position and, how it will develop moving forward. But that's definitely
We've done the
topic.
typical Brexit thing of going, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to carve our own path. Let's copy it.
Of course, pretty much. I mean, I think we're saying we're going to do something slightly different and the US will do something slightly different. And that's what's very interesting in a global world, that you end up with different regulation on these things in key jurisdictions. That becomes very difficult to navigate when,
It's almost irritating, this AI topic, the way it's just everywhere at the moment.
Yeah.
But it does.
Sorry, I raised it.
No, it does lead you down some interesting intellectual rabbit holes, isn't it? You suddenly start just sort of like trying to unravel something in your head. I mean, I will never forget going to. I was in Glasgow, I think, or may have been in Manchester, and I went to an art exhibition with my wife. And you have these bad experiences. I swear to God, they had cling film hung from the ceiling, and we were just like, what the flip is this? But it led me to a thought, which is that, look, in music, you don't have to like what I do, but if you play some music, you need to think, well, that's well produced, that's well played, that's technically challenging. Maybe that's a hip hop thing as well, that you've got to have skills, blood, all of this. But it made me realize with art, the first thing I need to do is I need to be kind of impressed by it in some kind of way. I don't need to like it, but I need to be, bloody hell, how did you do that? Oh, that's a mad thing. I mean, and there's interesting examples of that. I'm a very good artist, but a big up Charlie Snug One, but one of the great sort of graffiti artists of the UK. But he, I remember being with him in an art museum, and they had one of those blue paintings or whatever, and you go, oh, that annoys me, I could do that. And he turned to me and said, no, you couldn't. And I was like, no, I could do that. And he was like, I'm telling you, there's absolutely no way you could do that. You have to learn art for years to be able to paint something because you can't see any brushstrokes. It's this perfect blue painting or however they've done it. I mean, I still think I could do it somehow, dump it in blue or whatever. But the point of the skill can sometimes be subtle, is my point. But what if, I think there is a level of art. Sometimes you just look at it and just think, this is fucking lazy. I mean, what is this? But I mean, I find that as an interesting thing. Now AI can, for me, fulfill that objective. AI can produce something like, well, that's technically impressive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, I've had some quite interesting discussions with people who are very into the technical side of AI and then coming at it from an art point of view, that it can produce. I mean, you made the point around kind of corporate material, create, I want an image that does the following. I mean, it's incredibly good at that. I think the interesting thing is, what does that do to an art industry? Because actually, if it becomes increasingly easy to do those kind of things, that's fine. Harder to do the kind of really out there creative stuff. But the point is, well, actually, how do artists survive? In a world where
that's what's
all of the
me.
Basic stuff.
That's their bread and butter.
Correct.
I'm thinking of our graphics. The amount of stuff he does is not pushing him, but I can't do it.
No.
But it's suddenly, and I can't compete with the speed.
Right.
I don't know if he's available. I'll get it the next day. I need it now.
I saw a designer talking about using. Well, actually, he wasn't that keen on using Midjourney because of potential legal issues around using Midjourney, but he was using Firefly, which is an Adobe product, to go, well, I'm producing photographs for a campaign for a large brand. They've asked for the following. Back in the day, that would have been a studio, 2 weeks of development work, choosing this dog or that dog and, producing the photo shoot for this campaign. And now really the right prompts and the right approach, and then a little bit of customer research on the imagery. It's a few hours.
I feel this is life, unfortunately.
Yeah,
we move forward. We move forward as humans. I
agree. That's what I'm saying. I think it's an issue, but we have to embrace it. Yeah. We have to understand it properly.
Find
and then
another job. I'm really sorry.
And we have to use it as best as we can and go from there.
I mean, that sounded really harsh, find another job. I just mean jobs disappear.
Of course.
Opportunities disappear.
The world moves on.
Be more creative is the other thing. It demands the human pushes its creativity more.
I agree.
Which is an interesting thing because, anyway, I'll never forget my room of cling film. What's been your biggest cock up, do you think, mate?
Obviously, don't make any.
Don't work with lawyers.
I think it's usually been, in our what you were talking about, running people. It's usually been taking, a person on who I feel is not aligned to what we're trying to do, and culturally not aligned to what we're trying to do, or vision not aligned to what we're trying to do, and thinking, but they're good at this or they're good at that, and it not really working. It, in my experience, rarely works in those circumstances if there's a more significant kind of either personality or approach type of issue. And I've got to.
What do you think about the new employment laws coming? Because that there goes our opportunity to train.
I think they're difficult if you're a business owner. If they all come in as they're in the Rayner bill, I think they're going to be very difficult.
I saw today in FT for the first time, thank Christ, writing like business has got a big problem with it. I'm like, hallelujah. They keep saying, business will be all right with it. Not going to be all right with it.
No, there's no basis on which those proposals are useful from a business point of view. They're not coming at it from that point of view.
No, they are. They're coming in for. I don't want to get political, but I can't get my head around this is if you want to do growth, do growth.
I
make things
agree.
easier, because I can't. How light the commentary has been on the fact rights from day one. You're like, sorry, hold the line. What did you just say?
You can't square it with this is a we're encouraging growth. We're a party for business. You can't really square it, I'm afraid. It's going to be difficult. We'll see what actually comes in.
Well, then they've got to go for the review, haven't they, or the feedback,
Correct.
or whatever they do.
But as it stands, it's definitely challenging.
I mean, I've just got to get my other bugbear off my chest, because it's driving me insane. Like, FT uses it less, but I saw this big article yesterday. The 5 big tax loopholes that need to be closed. Right. As far as I'm aware, the definition of a loophole is a law that is misused. You use a law in an incorrect fashion. By the way, in tax, that would probably always mean a scheme of arrangements for the main purposes of avoiding tax. So it's illegal. But they list the loopholes, and they're like, pension relief, loophole number 1, business property relief. I saw them talking on the Institute of Fiscal Studies. They had a podcast, and they were going, oh, there's a load of loopholes in inheritance tax that need to be shut down. They're talking about business property relief, which is the fact that when you die, you don't want a business to have to cough up 40% of its market value out of thin air. It's like saying, oh, this business is worth 10 million and we make $1 million a year. And you'll go, right, okay, very good. Tax. Yeah, can we have 4 million quid, please? It's like, well, no. I mean, I can go to the bank and beg them. I can sell my house, but I'm just going to sell and shut my business. I'm buggered. Yeah. So this weaponization of language, because my problem with it is if all the intelligent newspapers, inverted commas, keep using this word loophole. So for whatever it's worth, please stop saying loophole. They're the laws,
Yeah, and it's, should we have a change to those laws is a different point.
Good question. Let's debate let's not get everyone wound up. Everyone's starting that article like, oh, they're dodgy. Yeah. It's frustrating the crap out of me. And these little details of language, they matter so much,
Yeah, whereas something like, the tendency now to own private property in a company, right? That's a way of avoiding effectively capital gains on a property.
There's nothing wrong with avoiding, by the way.
No, of course not.
I'm just adding that to your sentence.
But of course, you might decide, well, that wasn't the intention of that, kind of approach. We don't want, or effectively by selling the company that owns the house, you're avoiding capital gains on the house because you're only selling the company, not the house.
Yeah. You're selling the shares of the company.
That kind of thing, of course, totally legal, and lots of people do it. You might decide, well, actually, I don't want that to be the case. But of course, that's a straight change of law,
And they've already brought in ATED and all these other taxes on limited companies to make that not. I mean, the other thing, and it would be interesting to talk about your parents a little, but the academics. So the other thing I'm really picking up, suddenly clicking, is whether it's been the newspaper or the fiscal studies, the people who are writing a lot of this commentary about what should we do to the tax system and what should be fixed. With great respect, they are all academics. They're the top Cambridge economists. They're the top, and then people go, "Wow, that's impressive. They must know everything about money." It's like, where are the entrepreneurs and the business people? Where are the people who actually understand this? And I reference this only because your dear parents were high ranking. I don't know. Tell me.
Yeah, they were both
astrophysicists.
Both Cambridge scientists. Yeah, so my mother's an astrophysicist, still is, and my father was a material scientist. So semiconductors definitely would not have commented on economics in any way.
Exactly. Well, I mean, we go. You know something about academia, then I would say, and you kindly pointed out, you mad person have got 4 undergraduate degrees, but. Do you think, I think you need diversity in decisions. Do we think it's a good idea to listen to academics solely? Because it seems to be there's an enormous skew to them.
Not solely. I think in any very important decision, you need to understand the diversity of the view, don't you? And of course, I'm sure there's a lot of value in, understanding economic theory and, feeding in. But of course, there's a lot of value in actually the people on the ground who are running businesses and developing that. If you're expecting to build an economy and grow it, you need to understand that view as well. And of course, other views. Bringing them all into the debate. Together,
because one of the things, it's not. Look, I'm sorry. Look, I've got great respect for very clever people from academia. It's not so much, oh, you're academics, so you don't know anything about real life. Actually, I'm not quite saying that. I'm saying, a lot of those people...
It's a different set of skills.
It's a different set of skills. And also, they're often very left-leaning. You go to university, I would say, you're going to skew left. You're going to skew and so you're coming from this position, and maybe you would say, well, businessmen skew right. I mean, even we're getting into the left and right, but there's an almost, almost a socialist sort of aspect to academia. Do you know what I mean? It's almost what it's about. It's not about ownership of IP and making money there. In fact, what is one of the big problems in this country? We've got absolutely brilliant universities, and we do struggle to commercialize them like the Americans.
Well, the universities definitely are well behind, say, the US universities, if you're talking about that specific aspect. So commercialization of ideas and IP. My father was a material scientist and, crazy high level, but he had really no interest in owning an idea and commercializing it. He was trying to solve problems.
Yes.
True academic sense. My daughter is very bright, likely will go into research. This distinction between pure academic research and commercial research is quite interesting. Different objectives. And this is the point, neither is wrong. Actually, pure academic research is very interesting because it isn't constrained by the idea of having to commercialize something. And of course, sometimes you can get incredible innovation through doing that. But it's just different. It's like, we're not saying that the academic economic view is not worth anything.
No, we want
it. We want it. Of course, it's very important, but it's more that you need all of these different views in order to come to a sensible decision that works for the whole, whole society or the whole group.
Too often I'm reading these articles and it's so-and-so from Cambridge or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like, where are the entrepreneurs? I mean, the real answer, I realize, they're too busy.
They're working.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but they're trying to run a newspaper and get a comment, and they're trying to ring up, Julius or whoever, and he's like, look, I'm in a meeting. I mean, I can. What do you want from me? There's a huge aspect to that, isn't it? And with respect, the academic, maybe, that's really interesting. I'm writing a paper on this. I'd love to discuss it.
I do think it's similar in politics as well. I mean, in the sense that, not with academics, but there are an awful lot of career politicians. I mean, you do want people to bring experience in relation to what they're doing.
Can we have some business people? They're not paying enough.
Yeah, not only business people, but people who are, that's probably true. They're not paying enough, but actually you don't want, however good the person is, however well-meaning the person is, having someone come in to run the treasury or someone to come in and be education minister who doesn't know a lot about that. And of course, that's the whole point of the civil service and this, that, and the other. But you need some experience to bring to that.
Well, I always think another microcosm is surveys. Whenever they produce some survey.
Who have they asked?
Yeah,
the people who want to answer a survey.
Yeah, or grannies. I love the grannies, but hubbies have died. They're still alive. They're wandering around the street. I just think you're going to get, busy business people, not to sound like arrogant twats. They're not going to stop in the street. Do you know what I mean? There's a lacking of voice. Anyway, let's. What's the best piece of advice you were given?
Best piece of advice I was given. I think it's very easy to get really caught up when you're making decisions about what other people will think about the decisions. And I think, being advised not to worry too much about other people's perceptions of you, I think is very important. You know that some people won't like what you're doing. You've got to make your decisions for the right reasons. Obviously understand things very well, but not worry too much about, what other people think of you. I think that's,
it's quite hard sometimes.
It is very hard, but I think it's like the right advice. Yeah,
it's great advice. It's almost one of those things that harks back to the school days, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This fear of
not
shame
being liked
or embarrassment or not being popular.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, of course, you've got to make decisions. If you're leading a business, you've got to make decisions that aren't that popular, but they're, you've got to make them for the right reason. You've got to, be committed to them. But at a certain point, if you're constantly worrying about what other people will perceive of them or how people will perceive you, I think that really freezes you in your decision making.
I think what you're almost saying too is, because sometimes I think that stuff's so subconscious, is when you're struggling with a decision, because I find this very hard to do sometimes, try and recognize the bit of it which is connected to your fear of what other people might think and try and split it out in your brain, isn't it?
Yeah,
try and say, look, there's an emotional response going on here that goes back to being 12, or whatever. Yeah. Try and just, right. You know what I find a brutal way of doing that too? It's the line down the paper. If you're stuck on a decision, you do a line paper, pros and it's suddenly very clear. I don't know if you've ever done this when you're in a relationship. You get to the bottom and you're like, oh God, I've got to leave her.
It usually is when you have the objective data, don't you? But it's often that emotional point that's stopping you from it. Yeah, exactly.
And what do you think is bullshit in your industry and why?
Bullshit in our industry. Well, I think, if I'm being really brutally honest, I think there's in the legal industry, and you're, involved in our industry. I mean, I think over the last 15 years, it's become more and more focused on making money and not about giving really good advice. And of course, there should be a balance between those things. Of course, if you're good at what you do, you should be able to make money out of it. The reason I say that is because I think there's a lot of how legal service is delivered, which is designed to make money rather than designed to actually solve the problem. And I think that's a problem. That's not a good thing.
You think it's quite recent?
I think it's the last 10 or 15 years, I think.
I think a good example of that is divorce. I've seen, that's where I can think of, we've been dealing with a very wealthy chap's divorce, and my dad's been, and I've been going, so they've argued, he offered 50% of his wealth day one. They've argued, he's now, mental health has deteriorated, and it's affected him very deeply. We're 3 years in. And I asked my old man the other day, how's it going? And he says, we've moved £500. So 3 years. And I was like, why? And he's like, they're making money. The other lower side are just printing. But
it's crazy.
It's crazy.
So, and there's this conflict of interest in some of these things where the lawyers are not actually aligned with the interests of the clients. Sounds like an awful thing to say, but when you just think it through, it's like, well, if you're a litigator, you need things to litigate. That's your purpose. And it's like, well, actually, often the client wants to solve the problem. Now, sometimes that really needs that fought to a conclusion very well. It's a better business issue. Both sides are entrenched, of course. But sometimes, the lawyers themselves can be propagating this. I don't like it at all.
I didn't believe him when he said it to me. I said, you can't be serious. A professional in this day and age.
They may not be consciously, going, let's try and string this out. It's just more part of the, it's sort of a subconscious part of the process. Well, actually, we must fight all these points. We must continue to represent our client hard rather you kind of very easily ignore the why, right? Why did we do this in the first place? What are we trying to achieve? So even if it's not conscious, it tends to happen, or it can happen.
The legal fees on that, they've gained 500 quid in 2-3 years, and the legal fees have been over £1 million.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. You're probably right that they get sort of stuck in the machine, that they're sort of trying to argue the point, aren't they?
Yeah. But also in that situation, I'm not a family lawyer, but in that situation, that you've got crazy emotion on both sides a lot of the time. So actually, as lawyers, we've really got a duty to try and find the right solution rather than propagate the fight.
I like going to, sorry.
Yeah, no. So, sometimes that's not possible, of course, but it does feel like, we as an industry are quite happy, relaxing in the fact that these things continue and the fees are good.
Do you find I quite like going to a barrister sometimes to get an answer?
Cut through it.
Yeah, because the barrister will sit there and just say, if we went to court, probably end up there, in my view. What do you feel about, because a lot of this then comes back to hourly. Do you guys bill hourly? Or
We don't. We have hourly rates because everyone asks us for them, as in, what are your hourly rates? We pretty much everything we do, we look to provide a fixed fee for. I like the clarity of it. It's not necessarily about being really cheap on something. It's more around providing the clarity for the client that, when you get into this, it's not suddenly going to escalate out of control. What you're getting into is the following. If you don't want to spend that, let's not do it. Rather than go, well, we're going to charge you 400 quid for this, and the next week £1,000, and the week after another 2.5.
People are happy. Hourly, it could be £5,000, but if you say it's a fixed fee of 10 grand, people choose the fixed fee.
Sometimes we don't tend to do that, but certainly providing the fixed fee and the clarity for it is a real principle for us, and I care about it quite a lot.
Yeah, I find it a subject that is so important because but the number one frustration for client would be, unpredictable, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
I find complex tax advice so hard to fix fee though. That's what I'm meaning with a fixed fee. It's almost like you've got to say, well, it could be up to 50. Okay, it's 50 grand.
Yeah, and there's something in that. And, to a certain extent, as a consumer of legal services, going out for my business, I found it really interesting when you push someone, you go, well, what's this going to cost on this transaction? They go, well, it's going to be somewhere between 7,000 and 9,000. You go, well, I'd like a fixed fee. And they go, well, 12,000. I'm like, well, the range you provided can't have been right, can it? I mean, it's
really? They would say that almost.
very interesting. And it's like, well, I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
Because actually what you were saying was it could well have been 15 or 16 or,
Yes,
it's very, very interesting. And I think, whilst I appreciate it's difficult, I think it's from a client understanding point of view, I think it's really important to at least try that. Be clear about the parameters. If things change, of course, people are usually understanding in it, but actually aiming to provide clarity so that people can make sensible decisions, because you've got to make a decision on going into these things. Am I going to do it or not? I think that's very important.
I think the hourly model to a great extent is, but do you time record still though to work out whether you're profitable internally?
We time record from a management of the work point of view, actually have we spent too long on this or not, but we don't use it for then the onward bill, if that makes sense.
Because it's a pain in the arse time sheets, but I think you throw that out the window, you're like, you don't know anything.
Yeah,
you're literally just making numbers up.
It's in our world, it's quite useful from a management of the work point of view. But and actually sometimes clients come back and say, well, can you justify this? You need to be able to do that.
Very good, Julius. You've been fantastic. So we're going to do a few fun things to end. So first of all, this is our quickfire round. Very short and punchy. I'm going to ask you questions that you should know the answer to. D, cue the music. Question number 1. What was your first job?
Waiting tables in a college in Cambridge. Some silver service, some not.
Oh, little silver service. Very nice. Sounds more glamorous, I think, than it is. What was
it wasn't glamorous. I was 15. It wasn't glamorous.
You should call every business like silver something.
Silver service.
Silver service.
That meant slopping food onto
silver
a plate.
Service. Oh, I worked in silver service McDonald's. What was your worst job?
Cleaning.
Yeah, really.
Toilets. Shocking.
Yeah.
Don't want to do that. I have every respect for anyone who's making a living doing that. It's a very hard job.
Tough job.
Yeah.
Favorite subject at school?
Maths.
Oh, really? What's your special skill?
I don't feel pain.
Really?
Yeah, genuinely don't feel pain.
What, like you feel touch?
Yeah, I know that. I mean, if I consciously can engage with what's going on there, but I don't actually feel proper pain.
You've had your leg broken or anything? You didn't really feel it?
No.
That's
if it's pointed out to me and I consciously engage with it, then I feel it.
How peculiar! That's Wolverine.
Yeah, I've had a paper written on me on it. So
really, is it quite rare?
I think it's pretty unusual.
And this is since you were a little boy, you'd fall over and
since I was sort of 9 or 10, around there.
That's the man. We've got a superhero. That's the first superhero we've had on the show.
It's not very useful.
People are going to come up and put needles in you.
Pain is actually quite useful in your life. It points out when something is not going well. So it's quite a useful thing to have.
Yeah, internal pain, would you not get?
Not really, no.
Because you can't really point that out.
I mean, emotional pain,
Yeah, true.
Everyone feels that.
Wow, we've got Wolverine on the show, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I mean, a golfer, I would say. I mean, come on.
Who doesn't want to play golf?
He doesn't want to play golf all the time.
Mathematics, doesn't feel pain, golf.
Yeah, quite. I mean, it's an interesting combo.
That's a Venn diagram, isn't it?
That you don't see very often.
Yeah, quite right. What did your parents want you to be?
You know what? I saw this question. I don't think they had any preconceptions. They certainly didn't express them to me, as in, I definitely want you to be X. They didn't want me to be an academic. Everyone kind of assumed that, you must have had loads of pressure on you academically. Didn't feel that way. So, I don't actually know. Is that bad?
No, I think that's good. I think most people answer, my parents wanted to be happy. But I just always think of a conversation with my dad when I was about 10, when he was like, what do you want to be? And I was like, happy. And he's like, what kind of nonsense is that? That's a transient state. He was like, sometimes you'll be happy, sometimes you'll be sad, sometimes you'll be angry. What, you wanted to be happy all the time, like a bloody Cocker Spaniel or something? I still remember it. I was like, yeah, good point, Dad. Anyway, he's like, don't you want to progress? Don't you want to achieve something? Anyway, what's your go-to karaoke song?
Regulate, Warren G.
Wicked, man. I love it.
I mean, it's not that easy, but you give it a go.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Round up.
Oh yeah, round up. You can throw your truth out here. Office dogs, business or bullshit?
For me, bullshit. I'm really sorry.
No, I think they are bullshit in business.
I think generally, I think an individual dog who's super well behaved, fine, but generally,
Craziness.
dogs, I think it's craziness.
Yeah, I'm kind of basically rolling the whole boss's son card and just sort of like generally getting away with murder.
You get away with it.
I had lunch with you or something when I take my dog to these meetings. Sometimes I see my client just look at the dog and look at me and just think, what the fuck is going on? Anyway, have you ever been fired?
No.
Very good. And what's your vice?
I mean, you can see me obviously eating.
You don't drink?
I don't drink. I don't smoke.
Are you a sweet tooth?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm an anything tooth, really.
What was your absolute bête noire, favorite dessert or something?
Favorite dessert would be something chocolate and caramel based.
Oh,
pretty much anything.
Sort of millionaire shortbread.
Yeah,
world.
that kind of thing. That kind of area. Chocolate.
Chocolate.
And in the same way as I don't feel pain, I don't really have an end point there. It's not like I have to stop.
Dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Milk, probably.
Milk. Actually, we should add that to our questions. That's quite a good question, dark or milk. Anyway, it could get a little bit controversial at times. Any tips for founders or entrepreneurs?
Well, probably my tips on this are not to be put off by risk. I think it's very easy when you think you've got a good idea and you want to move something forward. You can just feel a bit frozen by the risk. You've got to analyze the risk. You've got to understand what will happen if it goes wrong, and you've got to be okay with that. And I think that frees you up, I think, to really move forward. I think that's a really important thing. I've seen a lot of people go, oh, there's a risk there. I don't want to do that. It's like, well, how big's the risk? Is it a risk that I die? Is it a risk that I'm bankrupt? Is it a risk that I'll just have to go and get a job? And, actually all of those things mean different things to different people. Assess that properly. Try and get out of the situation where you're kind of frozen by it, and then move forward. I think that's a very really
mathematics answer, though. I think it's a good answer, because the mathematics when you're younger is going to be easier, and the more certain things get harder, don't they?
Well, but I think that's relevant, isn't it? I mean, if you're at a certain stage of your life where losing your house would be catastrophic, then don't do it.
Yeah,
right. If you're at a stage where it wouldn't really matter, I'll be okay, then fine. I remember when I set up. I kind of thought that through and thought, well, if it goes wrong, I had personal guarantees on the loans that I was taking when I was setting up. I'm like, I'm going to lose my house, but I like my house. But would I be able to look after my daughter, my kids? Yes. I'd get a job.
You'd work it out.
I would work it out.
I didn't ask you, how did you get into this? What was
in terms of my own business? Yeah. I mean, in terms of falling into this, I fell into this profession, however many decades ago. Found it. I was wanting to do another degree, wanted to get a job.
Another one? You've done 4.
Well, I was one of those.
Oh, right, okay.
And I remember, meeting some people in this space. I didn't really know about it. Honestly, it was terrible. I wouldn't get a job now. And kind of fell into it, and then got more and more interested in it as I, became more experienced in it. And then in terms of setting up my own thing, then it was very much thinking, actually, I want to do this differently. And,
almost you worked somewhere and got a bit frustrated with.
And no criticism of it. I just wanted to do things a bit differently than the world was doing it, if that makes sense.
What were your 4 degrees?
Law, philosophy, history of art, and maths.
Did you just do them one after the other, all at the same time or something?
Not all at the same time. That would be very entertaining. No, one after the other. Yeah. 3 of them while I've been working, so sort of evenings and that kind of thing. I'm now way too old and have made way too many other things to do.
You didn't want to leave university. I had a friend who kept sort of having another degree and going back. It's like, it's such a nice world almost.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I was doing them while I was working. Only the first one. Only the first one was being at university. But I just like learning things.
Wow. Okay, well, that was all brilliant. Was there anything else you wanted to say for founders and entrepreneurs? That's good.
Not to set up a business with the only intention of making money.
So true.
I just don't think that's the right motivation. You got to have a passion. You got to have a real reason to do it. And because, who knows whether, if you're successful with it, hopefully you'll do well. But I don't think it should be the only motivation.
In this country, I don't think you can tell people I've set up a business to make money. People
are
like, God, that's disgusting. It's
how dare you?
How dare you? You're not going to save penguins or something. It's like, it's kind of just hoping for some dough. Okay, brilliant. That brings us to our favourite part of the show, the business or bullshit quiz. You've been absolutely wonderful, Julius. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Julius is a good neighbour of us here at OC, so you make sure you go chat to me if you've got some IP issues. So you don't have any issues, I guess. So we're going to name a few things, business terms. You need to grab a paddle. You need to, when you answer, you need to hold the paddle up and say business or bullshit. I'll take a paddle. I'll have a paddle. You can have 2 paddles. You can have 2 if you want. If you want a double paddle. Yeah, this no, you got 2.
Oh, there's.
You
got
only
it.
need one. You only need one.
Yeah, sure.
Mathematics. Anyway,
Didn't work out. It was double-sided. It's difficult.
The little clues. So we're going to read some phrases. You've got to say whether they're business or bullshit. I'm going to challenge you possibly, or we'll have a discussion. All clear? You ready to go? Office nap pods.
Bullshit.
Have you got one? Not got one?
We don't have one. I mean, we have a nice office, but we don't have a nap pod.
No. Team building exercises.
I think they're business.
Are they?
I think so. I think team building is important. I mean, there's a real variety of different things. Some of them are terrible, but I think the exercise is important.
Would you take your whole team out and give them some straws and tell them to build a castle or anything?
No. Maybe not that exact exercise.
Sorry, team. I thought it was a good idea.
We found the only way to build teams is to take straws and build a castle.
I just remember when I was made to do that once, and I just remember thinking, what a load of nonsense.
I think teams that know each other, understand each other, likely work better. So doing something to foster that, I think, is important. Exactly what it is, will depend on the team and that kind of thing.
Yeah, fair enough. LinkedIn.
Business.
Yeah, it is a bit quite business. You're quite active on LinkedIn.
I'm not that active from a posting point of view, but I use it. I mean, it's so useful to keep track of people and follow people up. Yeah,
because I mean, otherwise, it's it was Facebook for a while. It was MySpace or something.
True,
now it's like, oh right, and you want to see their CV, don't you? You know,
it's very useful.
I'm sorry, I didn't invest in it. Insurance.
Oh, I mean, it's necessary, but I fucking hate it. Yeah.
I mean,
I hate it with a passion.
I mean, I do not want this to happen, God, but you almost want your house to get burned down just so you can finally say, well, that was worth it. But I bet they'd still screw you, wouldn't they?
The only story I have, everyone who knows me knows that this story. I went to Australia with my wife. I rented a car, and as I was renting, I hate insurance. As I was renting the car, there were various boxes you had to tick, and one of them was kangaroo insurance.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, that's absolutely ridiculous. But because it's so ridiculous, I'm going to take it because it was $9. So I ticked the box and took the thing. 20 minutes later, I'm driving along a little road outside the Margaret River, and an adult kangaroo landed on my windscreen. And it was running full pelt across the road. I was doing 50. We coincided in its stride pattern, and it absolutely totaled my car. I mean, they're big. Adult kangaroos.
Big, what are they called? Big reds, I think they're called. Yeah.
And I tried to avoid hitting a tree. The car was basically totaled. It was covered in blood and kangaroo.
The kangaroo's dead?
Kangaroo wasn't dead, but I mean, it can't have been that well. And I limped the car back to the hire car place and said, well, I had the kangaroo insurance. And there was no way of not realising that it had been hit by a kangaroo. It had a kangaroo-shaped imprint on the front of it.
And all the people in the office currently thinking, that's ridiculous, I'm not ticking that box. Like, give me my form back.
It's the only time I've been pleasantly surprised by insurance.
You got it right then. I'm surprised.
I only did it because it was so ridiculous. If it had been anything else, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Kangaroo insurance. Mm-hmm. Only in Australia. Universal basic income.
Universal basic income.
So, the idea we all get a bit of money each month.
I think it's business.
Oh, do you? Does that work?
I think I don't know. I mean, I think the point of assessing what the kind of minimum, that's okay in society to live on, I think is sensible. I think there are lots of other things that need to flow from that. So, I might take a different approach to how tax works and all of that kind of stuff over the top of it. But understanding what actually society requires to provide to someone, I think is worthwhile. That might not be exactly what you mean by that.
Well, it's the concept that the benefit system is incredibly complicated, really hard to access, and it would maybe
just
cheaper
simplifying
just to give everyone $1,000 a month.
That's what I mean.
People argue that people will do stuff for that money, they'll spend it, they'll be more productive. I mean, there's the cynical bit in me, and I'm sorry we didn't get to test this out during COVID, is that I'm not sure people do anything. I mean, they certainly did not bloody much during COVID, but they weren't allowed to work.
No, that's true. That's true. So
I mean,
the worry is, of course, that people who don't need it are getting that and not doing anything with it, of course. And it's very difficult to legislate for that. But
actually, COVID, they should be able to analyse. You weren't allowed to do the job you were supposed to do, but you were allowed to do something else.
Yeah,
and actually, there were plenty of people who came up with innovative ideas. But I don't know. I've been brought up by quite is it Quakers? I don't know. Someone who just believes that, my dad's just like, work hard. Everyone must work hard, you know.
And I agree with that, but there's a balance, isn't it? I mean, I agree with that personally. I mean, I think, but there's a balance, in relation to what we expect out of society. For example, I think I go to the US a lot. Full on capitalism, no support is not right either.
It's terrifying for them.
So, finding that middle ground from a system point of view, I think is not easy. I don't think we've got it right. I don't know whether a universal basic income would sort it out, but actually understanding what, how someone should be supported by society is reasonable. Obviously, then having a system that then people don't take the piss over is hard.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the US, but if you've never been to the US, one of the most shocking things is seeing real poverty there.
Yeah.
You rarely see.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, here's another one. In-office fitness classes. You ever done any of that?
I mean, I haven't. I mean,
we got a yoga room.
We don't have a yoga room, but we do provide some of that stuff. So I'm going to go business.
Okay, very good, excellent. Ask your HR team alone.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Julius. Jesus, diversity quotas.
I'm very keen on diversity. I'm not keen on specific quotas.
Yeah, I think I would agree on that. I think that's where it ends up. Let's do. Hang on, I've done a lot of these things before. Let's find something new. I don't even know what that is. Well, let's have a crack at it. Self-actualization.
I'm going to go bullshit because I don't understand.
I don't really understand that one either. We'll skip that one. Do a couple more. Oh, I've got to pull the big one out. Brexit.
Bullshit.
And have you seen any Brexit benefits? I know it is like that.
I'm going to go no. I mean, from a society point of view, I think it was a crazy thing to do for us. I do have a lot of sympathy for the fact that at the time, it wasn't easy to unpick what was right and what was wrong. I know what I felt about it, but the way our government handled it, the way the debates went, the way information was provided, I think it made it very difficult for people. But ultimately, it does feel fairly obvious that it was going to be more difficult to access the EU. It was going to be more difficult to travel and things were going to get more expensive. And that's what's happened. And that's not good for us. I so
agree with your point because I remember feeling very confused about it all at the time.
I remember watching a BBC program and they're talking about security. And you had an ex-head of MI5 saying we must leave the EU. And we had an ex-head of MI5 saying we must stay in the EU. So
wow.
What the hell are we supposed to do with that?
Yeah, it was like that business leaders were coming out in either direction, weren't they? It's going to be brilliant. It's not going to be brilliant.
Fundamentally, I, as a member of the public, shouldn't have been asked to make that call.
No.
I'm very anti the government creating that situation. I think I have sympathy for people who voted that way. Don't agree with it, but we shouldn't have been asked to do it.
Shouldn't have been asked.
No.
And actually, if you ever do a referendum like that, I always think of the simple example. It's like, it should have been like, look, this would be massively catastrophic. We believe that is our position on both sides of the parliamentary bench,
Yeah.
So therefore, we're going to need a 70% or a 60%.
Would have been reasonable. Would have been reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, we would never do a vote in this office and say, are we going to do X and Y? And it's exactly 50-50. And you'd say, I remember the guy, a massive majority. It's like, 100,000 people's bugger off when you're catching 60 million. Silicon Valley.
Business.
Is it
for
still
us,
happening?
For us, it is.
Is that a big aspect?
It is a lot of
Silicon Valley boys,
big brand creation, and that. I mean, from the business point of view, I mean, the investment market is a different world. But
government grants.
I'm going to go bullshit.
Oh, you not had any, or
no?
And you don't believe in them?
I'm not believe in them. I think the concept of stimulating business is a good one, but I mean, how they're run, I think, is pretty terrible. They're making the assessments, etc., and I think they get exploited quite a lot.
Which one are you thinking of? You thinking of R&D and things?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, you actually think the R&D tax credit is a bit of a nonsense?
I think the concept is good. I think like with a lot of things, the execution is perhaps not.
Would you do anything to try and sort of, because the principle of the R&D was countries with more IP are richer. Let's have more IP.
Well, I think R&D tax credits are slightly different from the grant, I think. I mean, I think that system, you definitely want a system to encourage innovation. exactly how the grants work. So applying for a grant to
you're
do
thinking
X
of
and Y.
innovate.
Yeah, that's that kind of thing. I think that's harder. How those assessments are being made.
Oh God, and they're so specific.
Yeah.
They're like, if you've got a barrel with chickens in it that can eat crab meat on a Tuesday, this one's for you. We're giving out £1 million. It's like, and some chicken manufacturer's like, got to get into crab and get some barrels. It's like, why? It's like, they'll give us £1 million apparently. It's like, well, can we spend that on something else? No, you got to spend it on the crabs and the barrels. Yeah. Anyway, formal directors meetings.
I'm going to go bullshit.
Oh,
formal ones. I mean, I think collaborating is important, but
how many do you have? Lots of directors? Is it just
we
you?
have a few. I mean, I have a management team, and to be fair, we meet quite a lot. So I probably shouldn't have said that. I mean, I think they're useful.
Well, it's the word formal. You
really I think it's the formal side of it.
Yeah, wearing a suit and tie.
Yeah, rubbish.
Man there, keeping things. We'll do a couple more. Free ports. You aware of anyone using this collectively? These things?
No, I mean, I do know. I mean, I know about them, but you know what? I don't really know enough about them to comment too much. Them. Yeah.
Regulators. Come on, Julius.
I'm gonna
me down.
I'm gonna go bullshit.
All right, we're gonna do one more.
No comment in case any of them are listening.
Comment. Let's do. I want something that's quite relevant to you. I should have. Oh, let's do this one. Why not? Digital nomads. Everyone living everywhere, doing their thing.
I'm gonna go bullshit.
Yeah,
I like people being in.
Yeah, are you? What are you? 3-2, 5-2?
Well, we only force people to be in 2 days a week. As in we have a rule.
We encourage.
Well, we encourage more, but we do say, actually, I don't want people working fully remotely.
No.
And it's very annoying. It's the only thing I think I agree with Elon Musk about. So I dislike Elon Musk, but he's very clear about that side of things. Actually, collaboration and work is better, when you're actually engaging with people.
I think the staying at home is just too easy, isn't it? It's just, we have to remember that we're evolutionarily evolved to preserve energy. We like to be lazy, but it's not good. I mean, this morning my son didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to go to work. He didn't, my daughter didn't want, and he was like, oh, he really doesn't want to go to school. And I was just like,
so
it's fucking was the morning. Actually, it was Monday morning. I'm thinking it was Monday morning. We were all miserable. And I was just like, oh, for God's sake, let's get on with it.
This is not a choice he has.
This is not a choice. I have a dear friend who's always like, I can't get out of bed in the morning, Andy. I really can't. He doesn't work. And I'm like, nor can I.
I make myself. I mean, we were always, before COVID, we were always tried to be very flexible. So actually, if someone, had things in their life or how they're running their kids or whatever it is, be flexible about that. And, so I agree with that. I agree with flexible working, but that is not the same as then being remote entirely. And, I think, there are benefits. I mean, a lot of people say, I work harder when I'm at home, I get more done. And I get that. Not that everyone is being lazy at home. Of course, everyone, lots of people work their asses off and probably work too much. I don't like working at home because I have no separation. I don't stop. But I think you really miss out on the collaboration and the community of being in,
how do you balance? We find the flexible one quite complicated at times. We've got an audit team, or I have to say, I have things that they're always urgent. You pick up the phone, it's 5:55. Oh no, they went home an hour ago and they've clocked off early. You're like, what? I need them now. I'm busy in the morning. So there's an aspect of when you're not synchronous with everyone. But would you be quite relaxed that, someone's going to start at 11 and go to 8 and whatever?
Well, our starting point is in any given team, you've got to kind of contract with the team. So, depending on what you're trying to get done, if that is important, like if your entire client base is based on the West Coast and everyone is finishing at 3 p.m, that doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
So, I mean, it has to be driven by what you're doing because ultimately we're a business, so we have to do that. Within that, then contract with your team. So it might be okay. Actually, it might be really useful to have someone working 11 till 8. That might be very helpful, but it's more about communicating with everyone to see, how does that work? Of course, creating then a regular pattern around that is, again, same thing. It's like, well, does this regular pattern work for what we're trying to do? If so, great. But if it puts loads of stress and strain on the rest of the team, that can't be the right thing to do. So, I think there's not a sort of one size fits all in my view in relation to it. If you've got a job which is predominantly about, I don't know, running the office facility, you can't then work at home 3 days a week or whatever it is. I mean, it's going to be different depending on the role.
Yeah, it's, flexibility is so important to people. But yeah, I find that if only it was just there were teams and that team could sort it out. But certainly my job as a partner is like, I don't know who I might need. It could be anyone, but at least I know if it's in the window 9 to 5:30. A lot of people work 8 till 6, but it's like, but yeah, we're just having a big debate about it internally. Anyway, Julius, you've been absolutely brilliant. You got 7,300 points, which is really excellent score.
I think that's good. I have no idea,
that's
but
very good. You lost a few points over your mathematics on the paddles, but we won't.
That's absolutely fair.
We won't. Yeah. We won't dwell on that further. Check out iamstobbs.com if you need any help with your IP. You know who to call. And there you have it. That was this week's episode of Business Without Bullshit. Thank you, Julius. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Romeo. Until then, it's ciao.